Hi, welcome to Good Grazing Makes Sense. We have talked a lot about the sustainability of ranching and rangelands and the connection that has to the ranch, whether it be a family operation or a corporate operation, being economically viable. We're going to dedicate some of these videos strictly to the economic side of ranching and how that affects rangeland production. So today with us, we have ShayLe Stewart with DTN, who's going to give us some of her thoughts on the 2025 market outlook. ShayLe, you want to take it away and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dave. And I'm sure grateful for the opportunity to be here with you this evening. We can't spend enough time having these conversations because, for lack of a better word, if anybody knows where this market is going, they are above everybody else, beyond everybody else, know something that everybody else doesn't know because, my goodness, as I wrote my closing comments this afternoon, it was just an utterly bewildering to write the figures, to write the numbers in which I did. And so just give a quick introduction of myself, and then we'll dive into the nitty gritty this afternoon. But ShayLe Stewart here, my husband and I, Jimmy, we live in Cody, Wyoming with our two sons, Stetson and Coy. We run a registered Sim Angus operation here, and we have the Big Country Genetics bull sale. I've been blessed with the opportunity throughout the day to work for DTN as their livestock market analyst since 2019. And so I'm very passionate about the cattle market. And for our customers, what I do is I write on what happens throughout the live cattle and feeder cattle and lean hog complexes throughout the day, and to try to just help everybody make sense. You know, if you're a rancher out there, you've got your to-do list, and it's most likely not watching the futures complex while it trades throughout the day. And so that's what my job is for DTN, and I love it thoroughly. It is, like I said, bewildering at times such as these, but it's historical. And so I want to make sure that we are up to date and abreast on what's going on as much as we can, because I feel like the decisions we make right now, and I mean that as genuinely as I possibly can, the decisions we make right now with our finances, with any extra income that we see at the end of the balance sheet this year and potentially next year, will truly determine whether or not we sustain the lows in the next part of the cattle cycle or whether we don't. And so, you know, I just really think about the rich dad, poor dad theory, and how it's so important that we need to be acquiring assets and not assets that are actually liabilities. And so that was a rabbit trail in and of itself, but I'm excited to be here with you this evening, Dave, and to talk about some of these things.
I heard so many things that you were just saying that I could go on at least a 45-minute rabbit trail. Rich Dad Poor Dad. I just finished that book I think last year. What a
It's
great
awesome.
book, and totally agree. This is the time. This is a time when it's going to be really tempting to go buy a new truck, buy a new tractor, and I really want to caution people to think through those big purchases
Yes.
because we know these prices are not going to last forever. So that's a big question on my mind, and I can't be the only one out there. We've seen a very predictable cattle cycle in the past. You know, like a 10-year cycle that goes up, crashes, builds up
Yes.
slowly, goes up. So I'll be honest and share a little insight. We sold all of our cows last year, uh, and it was intentional. It wasn't a fire sale, but we waited
Yeah.
till we were just below the tippy top of what we thought the market was going to do, sold
Yeah.
everything, and we're going to just buy back in when the market crashed. And we passed the time that I had allotted for the market to crash and buy back in. And the big question: what's when's this thing going to crash? The fundamentals have got to show that this is not sustainable. When's it going to
Right.
happen?
Oh, well, if I had the answer to that question, I would be buying sections of land. I probably wouldn't be scratching the keys of a keyboard every day. So I first just want to tell you, I don't think that you're the only person in that situation. And I think that you were very wise. You know, there's a lot of individuals who have done just that, especially when they're of that generation, older than you, of course, who, you know, say, guess what? We're not going to make it through the next lull in the cycle to find the next high, you know, so we're going to go ahead and cash out now while it's smart and while we're savvy. And so I think that the big point that you really hit on there is, what is the cattle cycle doing? And I really liked how you talked about peaks and valleys, and I think that that's a good lesson to learn from 2014 and 2015. I mean, when it was hot, it was hot. When it was not, it was not. And it nearly changed what felt like overnight. Now granted, it was over the course of about a 2-year span, getting high and getting low, but really, like I said, that was a 2-year span. And what we're seeing in this cattle cycle is that the norms, the historical behaviors in which we've expected out of the market in years past are not necessarily going to be the playing field in which we navigate moving forward. And so what I mean by that is, as you mentioned, Dave, we've really got accustomed to being comfortable with a 10-year cycle, right? We expect that, for lack of a better word, there's going to be 2 to 3 years in that 10-year cycle where it really favors grassroots producers and cow-calf producers, and the other 7 can be anywhere from absolutely horrible to somewhat break even. That's just what we expect. But what I'm seeing this go around is that that's not going to be the playing field moving forward. I don't know if it's going to be a 12-year cattle cycle. I don't know if it's going to be a 15-year cattle cycle. I sure as heck don't want to stick my neck out on the line and say it's going to be a 20-year cattle cycle, because that's just so nauseating and uncomfortable to even fathom that I don't want to say that. But what I'm telling you is that we don't know what this going to change to. What we do know, however, is that it is going to be different moving forward. And so what I mean by that, for the folks that don't maybe necessarily know how the cycles work, is that and I think the best thing to remember is what happened in 2014 and 2015. So 2014, 2015, we had the liquidation of the cow herd. Feeder cattle prices ran sharply higher. 16 and 17, everybody wanted to be in the cow business. So they were buying back cows. Anybody, everybody, all across the country, they were buying cows. And so we saw a sharp liquidation in beef cow numbers. We saw then after that a sharp increase in the procurement of finding those cows again, so that they could hopefully capitalize on those strong feeder cattle prices. And that's specifically what we are not going to see moving forward. We've already seen the data. We really started to see the U.S. beef cow herd begin to be liquidated in 2022. And here you and I sit in 2025 saying, we've not seen any signs of growth in the cow herd. This past January, when the U.S. cattle inventory report came out, they were expecting that the U.S. beef cow herd would be around 28.2 million head. It came out right at 28 million head. And so that statistic is quite humbling, because that tells us we've not seen any retention in the number of beef cows or heifers being kept back yet. And so that tells us that we have at least 2 more years before there could be potentially females that, let's say, you went and bought, 4 million cows, Dave, and they're going to be in the cycle, in 2 years. So for lack of a better word, I mean, it seems uncomfortable to say, but we've already had 2 great years of feeder cattle prices, and without there being any signs that cows are being put back into the marketplace, should we still have 2 more years ahead of us if the data doesn't tell us even longer? That's the
So
question.
let's take it one step back and just make sure we're all on the same page. Do you think that these prices is the main driver, the cow herd numbers in the states, which was diminished
Absolutely.
by the drought and took us to lows, and is that what's driving this still?
I don't think that in this type of marketplace, in this day and age, we can ever say it's one single thing, right? Because this market is too complex, it's too diverse, it's affected by things that are related to nothing of cattle. But without a doubt, Dave, I really do believe that we would be in a much different scenario if we were still sitting, with 30 million head of cattle. It's much different now that the numbers have been liquidated. And I really do think that needs to be the single most determinant factor that you and I watch as we're, hoping to be profitable, sustainable, sound businesses that endure the test of time and become generational. That's what I'm going to be watching for. That's going to be a clue. That's going to be an indication, as well as drought.
Yeah, for sure. And so I don't want to put you in a situation where you're talking hypotheticals, but if you throw a drought in on top of this market, how's that going to affect the supply and demand? Because to be honest, we're looking at the possibility of drought coming, which should not be a big surprise. We ranch in drought
Right.
all the time.
Right.
If you add that variable on top of these low cow numbers, where people have to liquidate again, are we? That would have the possibility to extend this into a longer cycle, right?
Without a doubt. And so I'll just be completely frank and open and honest here. We had our DTN spring meeting in Omaha 2 weeks ago, and our weather meteorologist was there, and he said, you know what, our analogs, our weather forecasts are pretty accurate for the next 2 months. And it says that the moisture accumulation across the state is going to be extremely spotty across the United States. But from there, he said, it's a crapshoot. It's absolutely unpredictable, and he doesn't even feel comfortable giving a forecast. But what he did say behind that statement is he did say, but if we do look at what the current data is telling us, whether you look at the American model or whether you look at the European model, it's most closely aligning to that of 2012. And you're in Nevada, so you can tell us what the drought situation was like in 2012, and
So
that's what spurred, right? And it really makes me nervous because I mean, if we have another liquidation on top of these already exasperated prices, I mean, on one hand, as a producer in my shoes, I mean, of course I love the high prices, right? That's theoretically how I get paid. But on the other hand, you have this eerie feeling because you say, how does this sustain? Because there's that old market saying, right? The cure for high prices is high prices. And what really concerns me about that little quote right there, the cure for high prices is high prices, really comes down to the consumer. At what point do beef prices get so high that our consumers say, you know what, we love beef, we trust beef, we believe it's a superior product, but at the end of the day, I've got 4 mouths to feed in my household. I've got 5, 6 mouths to feed in my household. And although it is bar none above all anything, I simply just have to make my bucks go further at the grocery store.
absolutely. Something else came to me as you were talking in that first bit, kind of about building the cow herd back up. And I can tell you, I'm penciling all kinds of different things to get cows again because I really thought I'd
Yeah.
be taking care of cows again and in my happy place. So I'm running numbers on things I never thought I'd run. Like, well, what if I got some dairy heifers and ET'd them, or so
Yeah.
it makes me wonder: are other people when they're on the build back, are they getting the kind of cattle that they want to get? If you're trying to build back in an unstable market, that's got me a little worried about not getting the right cattle that fit the environment because I'm willing to do it just to get cows again. So,
Yeah.
did you see any of that? People buying back in and maybe not getting I don't want to say quality like it's bad quality, but maybe
Right.
not the
Numbers
genetics.
over quantity over quality, or maybe
Mhm.
you know what, a buy here versus what you want, reputation, genetics, what have you. And without a doubt, and I really think that for some of the younger producers who don't have as much access to capital, that is something that they're having to be a little bit flexible with. And so
Mhm.
maybe it's some cows that they know that they're going to have a little bit that they're not going to breed back as good because maybe they're a little bit thin, or maybe if we're here in the north or the northwest per se, maybe you're picking up some cows in the south, because they've been a little bit drought ridden. But I think that people are doing that everywhere.
Mhm.
I think that anybody and everybody's being flexible because I mean, goodness gracious, while I was looking at some prices here today, I was looking at Bud Williams' page, and there's some 10 to 13-year-old pairs, 10 to 13-year-old pairs for $3,500 on there. And I sat back and I was like, what a time to be alive.
Yeah.
What a time to be alive. And I'm going to be honest, I even had the conversation in my own head of, well, if you're able to sell the calf here in 4 to 6 months for, let's say, $2,000, and you can sell out of that cow for potentially $2,000 as well, that makes money. That makes money.
Given today's parameters, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a knife's edge. I could not take that risk to buy a cow that is that expensive,
Oh,
and
you and me
and
both.
I know nobody has a crystal ball to say, but it's this market has outlasted every bit of my
Yes.
worry. Now I wish 8 months ago I had bought those cows that were too expensive.
Right.
Uh, yeah, just a crazy time. What are you seeing fundamental wise on the um, on the worldwide market? Are other countries going to be able to take advantage of our low numbers?
That's a really interesting question because, and I'm just going to stop right there for anybody that's listening. fundamentals, when Dave asked about fundamentals, typically those are tangible things in the marketplace. So not speculative future things, but more things like beef demand, throughput, slaughter, imports, exports, beef cow numbers. Those are more fundamentals. And so I think what Dave is asking here is, hey, if our numbers are low, do we have to worry about competition from a different country? And really, one of the biggest competing factors that we've been dealing with is Brazil. And just last week, I read a headline that said Brazil is actually in drought too, and they're beginning to liquidate it on their cow herd. And so, yes, competition is always on the horizon because that's the world that we live in. But thankfully, Brazil, especially just because they export beef into so many different other countries, they're in a drought situation too. And so thankfully that might allow us to, keep our foothold. But, there are some challenging factors with the tariffs in play. And whether you love Trump or you hate Trump, we just have to look at the dynamics of how that affects trade. And so thankfully, you know what? Our representatives have done a pretty good job of making sure that we're funneling beef into various countries. But having a disruption with China, that's a pretty big factor, especially when you take into account here. Hold on one second. I wrote down exactly what percentage of beef they bought from us last year. They were right at 15% of our total exports last year. And you might say, oh, well, 15%, ShayLe, that's not too much. But when you put on the dollar figure in which that means, it's pretty significant. Now, thankfully, just in the weekly data, even though our beef exports have been down, there's already been other countries, like for last week example, even though our exports to China were just 82 metric tons, which was a sharp decline because they typically buy anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 metric tons on a weekly basis, sales to Hong Kong doubled. And so I know it's alarming that, we're kind of going to a battle in regards to trade with China. But at the end of the day, everybody knows that the U.S. has the absolute best beef that there is to have globally. And so because of our reputation product, I believe that we're always going to keep that foothold. But again, the price factor is going to be what could be a caveat to that and a hindrance to it.
That was one of I was going to try and get through this without forcing the word tariff into the conversation, but that was one of the best explanations of what's going on in the world right now, uh, and relating it to tariffs because who knows what's going to happen with that.
No,
Uh,
nobody
in,
does.
in
Yeah.
in terms of some of these other countries, are we seeing Canada or Mexico in any kind of destocking?
Yes, absolutely. The Canadian cow herd, it is depopulated. The Mexican cow herd, I mean, they imported so much beef and live cattle onto us last year that they don't have the numbers to sustain the amount that they've been importing into the United States that they have historically. But one thing that's been very interesting, and the timing of this conversation is great because I was able to pull some numbers again today. After the New World Screwworm news outbreak and we halted the imports of all Mexican cattle into the United States, we have not, since we opened up the floodgate again in February, it's not been at the pace in which it was before then. We've only imported to date 36% of what we had at this point last year. So from an import perspective, as a cow-calf producer myself, I say that's phenomenal. That's just valuing my feeder cattle that much higher because they're not having those Mexican cattle walk across the border. So I know that that's a double-edged sword because from a sheer supply and demand aspect, if I'm worried about box beef prices and I'm worried about consumers, there's that factor too. That yes, it does push beef prices higher.
How's beef on dairy going to affect us? What's
Ugh.
what's going on in that world? Where I'm from, there's not a dairy to be seen, and but I'm sure it's doing quite a bit in some other states.
Oh, honestly, Dave, it's one of the things that makes me most anxious at night because I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but I know it's a factor that I don't think we are giving enough attention to. And it's so crazy that these semen companies, when they're buying, these bulls, whether it's Select Sires or ABS or whoever you're looking at, they are looking at the numbers so precisely because they not only want to be able to market that semen for beef cows, but they also want to be able to market for dairy cows. And the beef on dairy is a much bigger deal than what we're giving credence to. And I think that there's a saving grace in that, because they have marketed so many of those beef on dairy calves, and especially females, those beef on dairy heifer calves, into the just beef industry to be put on feed, that thankfully their cow herd is needing to be rebuilt as well. Not to the degree in which ours is, but they're needing some of those females to go back into milk production. But on the same hand, they've seen, oh my goodness, have you seen what we can get on these beef on dairy calf prices? I mean, I'm here at the grocery store and going to pick up groceries in just a couple minutes, and I see the price of milk versus the comparison on what I'm getting on feeder cattle sales, and I'm betting they're scratching their heads saying, I wonder if we need to transition our business to simply putting, even if they are beef on dairy cross calves, on the cattle on feed, inventory, beef cattle inventory, as opposed to just going down the milk route. So that's a factor moving forward. And currently, it's showing up on our cattle on feed reports, and we're seeing that data. And it is something that we really need to be mindful moving forward about how that affects the total numbers.
Yeah, we're running a little bit short on time here. I want to give you a chance to tell people where to find you.
I do work for DTN, and they are a great company to get some commentary for if you're interested. And you know what? I look forward to stopping by every now and then and giving an update here as well.
Great. Look forward to seeing ShayLe join us at Good Grazing Makes Sense a little more often. Uh, cannot have good range management with producers who are broke. It's the two just do not cooperate. Just to kind of recap, when we're looking at where this thing's going to go, we're really paying attention to the U.S. beef herd as a whole. We're watching beef on dairy,
Yes.
and really just drought. Kind of it seems really simple. It doesn't give us a solid answer, but some insight as to what to look for and maybe help you sleep a little bit better at night when you're making decisions.
Yeah. And you know what? If drought's on the horizon, here we sit in the early spring of 2025, maybe you need to be looking at getting some hay protected around you, getting some hay inventory bought up. So just another little crumpet of information.
Great time to buy hay.
Great time to buy hay.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, thank you, ShayLe. I really appreciate you coming.
Hey, Dave, appreciate it. Take care, and thanks so much. Chat later.
Thanks.